On the 19th of April 2000, Tony Morton was sentenced to life in prison for murdering a 16-year-old with an illegally held shotgun and wounding another with the same weapon. However, there was a great deal of support and sympathy for Morton from members of the public who thought he should be exonerated of all charges. Stick around to the end to find out why. Morton had shot Fred Barras and Brendan Fearon while they were burglarising his house. Given the surrounding circumstances, Morton's guilt depended on whether he had used an unreasonable amount of force. The only way of knowing whether he did, however, is through witness testimony and forensic evidence. Let's start with Morton. Morton said he had fallen asleep in full dress reading the Farmers Weekly. He woke up hearing a window had been smashed. He left his bedroom, hearing that people were in his house. He retrieved his gun and slowly went down the stairs. Suddenly, a light was shining on him. Fearing for his life, he began firing. After that, he went back to his bedroom. Deciding to look around his house, he did not see any bodies or blood, instead finding hold-all bags and a missing window. He drove around his property, still seeing nobody, before going to his neighbours to tell them what had happened. He then drank some coffee at his mother's house and then stayed the night at his friend's hotel. Fearon is the only other witness to the events. He said that he encountered Morton's Rottweilers, whose barking must have been loud enough to wake him up. This means Morton was laying in wait for them, ready to ambush them. They jumped into what they thought was a shed in order to evade the dogs. He was using his torch to find a way out, and all of a sudden, gunshots. He managed to pull a window and left the house, fell down a dike and then passed out. He woke up again at some point. He tried walking, but it was difficult. He put his hand on his leg, discovering he had been shot. He moved over to a house with lights on. He moved with determination, thinking if he could just bang on the windows he would be able to get help before passing out again. These were Tony Morton's neighbours. They called the police and helped Barras until he could receive medical treatment. So far, it's just one man's word against the others. The only way to resolve what happened is through forensics. In the room where the burglars were, shotgun pellets were found in the wall. If you looked from where the pellets were to the doorway, you could not see the stairs. This meant that Morton's explanation that he had fired 3 shots from the staircase was unsatisfactory, unless the pellets had curved around the doorway into the room. The cartridge casings were found just inside the doorway, meaning only one shot could have been fired from the stairs, with the other 2 shots being fired from the ground floor. The inconsistency of the story, combined with the facts that Morton did not have a valid firearm certificate, felt no remorse, and that the fatal shot at Barras was in his back, turned the jury's opinion against him. He was found guilty of the murder of Fred Barras, the intentional wounding of Brendan Fearon, and owning a firearm without a licence. However, the more analytical viewers may see some issues with the verdict. Putting aside why the jury thought how Morton felt about the situation or whether he had government permission to use a tool meant that he had acted disproportionately, there are inconsistencies in the charges he was found guilty of. The jury found Morton guilty of Fearon's intentional wounding, but not his attempted murder, meaning the jury didn't think Morton wanted to kill Fearon, but for some reason wanted to kill Barras, despite the reason for firing upon them literally being the same. Either that, or they thought that Morton's use of force in response to the burglary was criminal whether or not it had resulted in a death, with the jury believing that Morton intended to criminally wound both burglars, the murder charge being justified by the intended assault resulting in death. However, this gives rise to the question, if Morton was truly committing a crime against these burglars of such magnitude, would they be justified in killing Morton in self-defence? Why would anyone wish to deprive these poor home invaders of the right to defend themselves against this eccentric loner? Surely not because this would effectively allow burglars to rob and pillage his house, because the chance of using slightly more force than necessary to protect his house would be enough to justify the victim's execution. Of course, in a situation where you are a victim of the crime, it's possible to show that your use of force was criminal by showing that it was disproportionate. Now, this does not mean that you are only allowed to defend yourself by doing what is directly proportional to what the criminal is doing to you. If it's necessary to exceed that in order to effectively defend your right, then you would be allowed to do so. For instance, when a burglar is caught, it would obviously be disproportionate to physically harm them, but it's quite possible that at the time of the burglary, injuring them could be the only way to see them off, and may even be justified to ensure they avoid getting away with any of your goods. Let's apply this to the fact of Tony Martin's case. While Martin did intend to injure both of the burglars, this doesn't mean that he had acted disproportionately as established. He didn't intend to kill the burglars, as the only time when he shot them was when they were in the house. If he intended to kill the burglars, then he probably would have kept shooting them after they escaped. Hence, Tony Martin lacked mens rea required for a murder charge, and given his use of force was lawful, he could not have criminally harmed the burglars or in any other manner that would give rise to liability. Through misunderstanding proportionality, consideration of irrelevant factors, and indicting him on misremembering the specifics of a stressful situation, an innocent man was now behind bars for life. Wisely, Tony Martin replaced his lawyers and thankfully had the charge reduced to manslaughter, meaning he would be released in 2003, although this was only because they considered him paranoid for wanting to protect himself in his home. This had come to characterise British law in self-defence. In 2008, Munir Hussain was found guilty of causing grievous bodily harm with a cricket bat to a burglar. This was despite the fact that the burglar had tied him up along with his family at knife point. This finally prompted the government to clarify the upper limit on self-defence, from unreasonable force to grossly disproportionate force. This has thankfully saved men such as Richard Osborne Brooks from facing similar fates, but the fact remains that a spectre of punishment by the state remains in the UK if you dare try to exercise your basic human right to self-defence.